Welcome to the Embodiment podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with embodiment specialists from around the world. I'm your host, Mark Walsh. On the show today, we have Stephen Braybrook. So Stephen is an expert in biomechanics. He's the author of The Evolution of Biomechanics. He's known as the movement man, has interesting background, lots of good things to say about the body. Stephen, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Thanks much for this podcast. I'm looking forward to delving in and having a geeky chat with you.
Good, me too. It's long overdue. So first of all, how did you get interested in working with the body?
My background is quite a varied one, really. I left school at the age of 13, 14 with no GCSEs, no qualifications. And I worked on a building site for a few years before I got into personal training. My schooling background really wasn't the best. I'm quite badly dyslexic. I do have a speech impediment, which gives me a stutter at times if I talk a little bit too slow. As people that do my courses know, I tend to talk fast and like a train. And I am officially deaf in both ears. I wear hearing aids variedly, but so my schooling really wasn't a great experience for me. But one thing that did allow me to do was, due to the lack of interaction, engaging in actual academia, it allowed me to play. And I played professional football up until the age of 17 before I had a very bad injury in my knee. So I was always a mover. So when I left school and I worked on a building site for a few years, I was always itching to get back into movement. So I started my personal training career quite young. Lucky enough, my first course I did the very first day we spoke about posture, traditional posture, the stuff you still find in many books. But that set me up really for life. So I followed every single modality of posture rehabilitation, from Alexander technique to Feldenkrais, all the way through somatics, Thomas Hanna, a lot of Tom Miles stuff back in the day. I think I bought the first edition of anatomy training. So I searched everywhere I could really to look at posture. Became quite a successful personal trainer. Taught Pilates, dabbled in yoga. Got a black belt in Taekwondo, martial arts. Was teaching that for many years, and just did everything I could that was around the areas of posture and movement. And then I went back Then I decided that I wanted to challenge myself and go to university. I went back as a mature student, having no real formal education, and I was able to get myself in through the back door, so to speak. And I ended up doing quite well. I got first my undergrad in sport and exercise science, went on to a master's in biomechanics. And it was then when I started to finish my master's in biomechanics, I had my first son. My son was born, and I was asking too many questions regarding biomechanics to my professors about why do we do this, why are we taking those measurements, why are we using that ideology, how is that relevant to the human body? And the answers that came back were because it is. And to me, being a mature student, now trying to fit all the practical areas of movement together with the actual academic scientific background, that really wasn't good enough. So when I left my master's in biomechanics, I had two choices. I could have continued down a PhD, or decided to delve deeper into my own language. And being dyslexic is one of those things I've always done anyway. I've never taken someone's word for gospel. I've always taken what they've said and then said, where did you get that from? And then where did that person get it from? And then just go back to the original ideas. Hence why I've chased so many different qualifications, so many different areas of posture and movement, overseas, US to the UK, just trying to put it into my own feelings and thoughts. So when I left university, I decided they want to spend the next 5 years doing a PhD on something which they didn't really want to go down, and just be one of those people that embeds more what I classify as non-true biomechanical information, where it gave me an opportunity then to search out, and hence why the book The Evolution of Biomechanics was born, delving into the deeper aspects of what biomechanics is in relationship to the human body, and finding along the way each pathway or each step that biomechanics took to give us the biomechanics that we use in academia now. Along each step, there was fallacies and faux pas, which added up to what I believe is a big fallacy regarding how academia strokes biomechanics and how reality and the human body strokes biomechanics. And that's where the book came out, and that's where it caused a few ripples.
Okay, so let's start with the basics here, because the audience are pretty mixed, I know, on this. And in terms of, we've got yoga teachers, dance teachers, body therapists, all sorts of people listening. Let's start completely at the beginning. What is biomechanics?
Well, biomechanics is a study of the biological body in relationship to machinery. I think that's the key to understanding biomechanics, is taking mechanical principles of machinery and somehow replicating the human form upon that.
Yeah. And I guess this whole podcast really formed on the premise that the body is more than just a mechanical machine, or a little bit more than sort of levers and pulleys. So what do you see as the central error in this kind of main way of looking at biomechanics?
I think it's when you just take away the fundamental basics and understand that, we have a biological body, but we don't have a machine body. And I think that's the mechanicalistic principles of human nature died hundreds of years ago, and we still somehow use the Newtonian principles of mechanics, the geometrical principles of Euclidean geometry, look at Brady's principles of levers and how it's applicable for man, and finding some form of scientific constant to give us an understanding of a point in space that replicates the human form at that particular point. And everything that is that regarding that point in space is then replicated as the human form as a total. And biomechanics to me is an understanding of, traditional biomechanics is the understanding of the biological body in the form of a robotic machine.
Yeah, and that's quite right, does it?
No, but I understand that, because that's the only way that you can mathematically equate and correlate and find the constant in Newtonian principles, which is a huge backbone of all physics. Equal opposite reactions, laws of continuous motion and angular motion, all that sort of language, which actually is representing a complete artificial, non-living, man-made, artificial piece of substance replicating its point in space. And then you start to think, well, how did biomechanics then take that upon form? And that one point in space then represents a human form in total. And for biomechanics to understand human form, it will then take everything it does within its mathematical equations, because that's what we end up doing, taking mathematical equations and trying to understand some place in space, and then representing the human body upon a stick figure.
Yeah.
We are completely made up of rigid, stiff, predetermined pieces of non-adjustable and non-living material, and that to me alone is not. I think everybody appreciates that's not biological. And I'm quite a simple person. If the laws don't fit the outcome, but we still represented the outcome of the laws, and something is not right. So if we understand that's not biological, then we can't go around using the traditional biomechanical language, principles, ideologies, and the scientific understanding within our human practice. To me, that's the biggest thing that we need to get away from, is if we understand that the biological is not a machine, but we are taking machine principles to understand the human body, then we must understand that machine principles that we are using in terms of biomechanics are not the right language we should be using.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there's something intuitively that most of us would have a sense of, like, hang on, I'm kind of like a machine, but not really. I'm not kind of a robot, which is quite so straightforward as that. There's these aspects to it that are a little bit different. Let's get specific then. So something I would have been taught, many people maybe couldn't remember, basic sports science or basic, GCSE or A-level high school, if you're in America, biology of the bicep and the tricep. And it's kind of like one thing contracts and the other relax. And it looks very kind of mechanical how it is in the textbook. So what's wrong with that picture?
Well, I think you have to look at the picture itself. I think, if we're using the traditional anatomy type model that we look upon in all textbooks, we need to understand, firstly, where that anatomical understanding comes from. And predominantly it comes from two places. One, it comes from Gray's Anatomy, which was an understanding from Henry Gray, taking dead bodies off the street that were decaying, and then cut them open and suggesting that all mankind is the same on a very few amount of numbers. Well, firstly, they're dead. So that's an issue. They're decomposing, which again, that's an issue. And three, when he opened them up and predicted, he then had to find a model to predict the basic understanding of what this thing could do. You know, the dead body's on a slab, and he picks the arm up and says, well, this is we give it the name of an elbow joint, or someone's given it the name of an elbow joint. It could be, you know, you can call it anything you want to. It makes no difference. It's a name that someone's given it. But for them to understand, then they must go back to Borelli's principles of lever systems regarding human locomotion. So when you look at, you know, Borelli's principles and start to look at actually how the man came up with the first real model of the machine man in motion through locomotion, and then you start to look at how we then replicate the human body. He replicated back on dead bodies. So you got this loop thing, you got this loop effect going on. One is representing the human body as a dead body, and the other one is in making sure that his understanding of the dead body is based on a dead body. So when you're looking at this and you're looking at the position that the cadaver's on the table, and you pick the arm up and you move it back or forwards, then because there's no life to it, the predictable manner will be a hinge joint. There is no, you know, you pick up and it will move. But then if you start to understand that the control of the human form is about organize itself the best way it can to produce a task or to make the task successful based on emotional, spiritual, physical, biomechanical, biological, all those kinds of bodies that the human person has, then you understand that no joint is ever going to be fixed in a predetermined plane. The amount of space around a so-called joint, even the name of joint is a fallacy, but the amount of space that could be created around the area where two bones are coming closer together is infinite. So even though the hinge joint may be the elbow, and you go, actually, you know, well, it looks like an hinge joint, moves up or down. It's the ability for it to go sideways and left and right and rotate in different directions that gives it the appearance of a linear motion. So there's no such thing as linear motion in the human body. Everything is a counterbalance between every single motion it actually has. It's just the end goal that we need to have. So from a biomechanical perspective, is that we are still understanding the human body based on predetermined mechanical principles of numbers, and then we're still representing that upon a pictorial book type form. So our anatomy is then based upon the knee has 3 degrees of freedom, the elbow has 2 degrees of freedom. Anything around the knee that goes in the sideways motion will always cause it pain. And then you say to yourself, well, actually, you know, every single joint can move in any direction it wants, because it's the angle the space between the bone A and bone B that's around the joint that gives it a space. So I always say, you know, let's take the elbow joint, for example. And we've got the lower part of the arm, the upper part of the arm, and we've got the elbow joint around that. I mean, we've got this sort of bone in this sort of so-called fixed casing. Now, we know that joints don't touch, because if a joint touch, every single joint being our physical conditioning. So we know that joints are determined to expand against each other. And the tensegrity type model is a nice, simple model to go by, even though it has quite a few flaws. But the ability for the bone to be expansive, or the body to be expansive, is one of the key reasons we're alive. Because if we weren't, then we'd be on the ground, crawling on the floor and being a big puddle. So for us to go against this artificial gravitational field, then we must expand into space. So we know that everything's expanding from the inside. Now, if you take the bone, you say, actually, that bone can go forward and back, up or down, left and right, rotate one way, rotate the other way. The bone below it can do exactly the same thing. Now, if you then just do very simple math, and I don't use math, but if you do a very simple math and then try to calculate the combinations that those two bones can be in at any time to give us movement, then the numbers will go into the thousands. So that suggests that the bones above and the bones below can configure itself in any way it wants to, predetermined upon the outcome of the goal, which is purely going to be brain-based, mind-based, psychological-based, spiritual-based, etc. So when you look at that, and then you take that and say, well, if that's the case, and that's a human form, but actually biomechanics is suggesting it's only 2 degrees of freedom, and I will then go, the elbow's flexion extension and flexion extension only. What that does, that makes people believe that the elbow can only go in flexion extension. And they train in only flexion extension. And when they train only in flexion extension, you are going to predominantly lose some of the space within that capsule, the area, that gives you more than those flexion extensions. So you can get stronger in flexion extension, but lose down the amount of variation and bandwidth and organization that you have around the other positions available. that alone produces what people see as, well, I can only go flexion extension because as soon as I go out of that hurts. And the issue becomes is that you are allowed to go outside that because the human body is formed to go outside that if you don't believe the traditional biomechanical principles that are underpinning not only academia within the science or research that people understanding of this is sport, you need to jump this high because your knee needs to be at this angle, but also predetermined upon the anatomy books that we all read that are purely based on this linear motion that's backed upon some scientific evidence and mathematically equate it through the traditional biomechanical language. So when you train someone to be linear, they become linear.
So I've been looking at this picture in textbooks, since I was a kid, and I kind of have this idea that my arm can only move up and down. So I'm doing, maybe my bicep curls in the gym or my kind of push-ups in a certain way, or my pull-ups, whatever it is. And, you're saying there's a kind of limitation on that. I mean, but surely there are also just physical limitations. I mean, like I've twisted a lot of arms and there's some ways they go and some ways they don't.
It's not a case of the key thing is you might have predominantly more flexion extension in the elbow joint. That's not the issue. You might have 85% of your motion in the elbow joint is flexion extension. You might have 50%, you might have 99%. But it's the remaining percentage that you don't have that you should be using. So even though my elbow might be made up with an anatomical positioning which favors flexion extension, there are other availability to it. And it's the other availabilities to it that gives the flexion extension freedom. And that's the key to people's movement is that they predominantly think the knee is flexion extension, both flexion extension, and flexion extension of the spine, but rotation, I do a little bit, but not too much. It's not so much the predetermined position that you think you can go in that's the issue. It's the remaining positions that you can go in that you don't go in. Because we all know that, rotation is actually linear motion. So if I take a camera, look upon your head, watch you move, you're rotating. It's the rotation of your body that gives you a straight line action. It's not the straight line action that gives you a straight line action. It's not the joints moving in straight lines. It's the rotation of your body that gives you a straight line motion. So if you lose that rotation of the body, you use up the availability you have in straight line motions. And if you lose up the availability you have in straight line motions, you are going to find yourself in all kinds of discomfort. So rotation gives us linear motion. Lateral flexion gives us linear motion. It's those two angles, or those two positions, and the variations of those. When if you start doing your mathematics and saying, well, even if I look at 6 degree of freedom that engineering uses, that biomechanics can pick up on certain joints, and you do a 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, and then calculate all those variabilities that one particular joint with a bone above and bone below can move, it's infinite. It's thousands. It may determine to go in one direction, it may like to go in one direction, but it's the use of the other direction which makes that direction successful.
So, Stephen, you're saying none of us are straight.
None of us are straight. I mean, impossibility to be straight. None of us are symmetrical. That's another fallacy. Everything is symmetrical.
There is this very idealized view of the human body and anatomy, isn't there? Which is kind of doesn't really exist in reality, that somehow we're symmetrical and we're all the same. And, I know there's some fairly huge anatomical differences. We had Gary Carter on here talking about some of these, some fairly big anatomical differences. And when you cut up even a dead body, which, as we've already said, is very different from a living body, there are some pretty big differences between people.
Yeah, hugely. And I think, again, with what you do, symmetry is, everyone searches for symmetrical body and symmetrical life and symmetrical. They think, if they're symmetrical, they're balanced. And to me, imbalance is constant. And if balance is consistency or constant, then nothing's changing. And nothing's changing, then
you're dead.
What's the point of being alive?
A pool of goo. I mean, I always joke with the yoga teachers I do. Sometimes I just do embodied yoga principles posture on one side, and the yoga teachers are so conditioned they really freak out.
Yeah,
they're kind of almost terrified of even for 2 minutes doing a posture just on one side, as if somehow that's going to cause a massive injury straight away.
Yeah, and again, to me, that's where biomechanics is a fallacy, because it's always looking for that symmetrical being. So not only is it taking artificial validation within mechanical principles of just in life, like understanding how a car works on a lever, then pretending that's a lever in the human body, or the wall and axis, and that's a joint in the human body, and taking these tiny principles of fixed linear motion and saying that's how the body moves, and all this sort of underpinning ideology where biomechanics has to somehow find a quantifiable number to believe that it's justifiable in what it says. And to find that, you must then go back to the only numbers you can find, which is, non-life and artificial physics. which is great if you want to look at the moon and the stars and the sun. Isaac Newton taking all these principles of all these principles of motion based on the position of the sun, moon, and an earth. And then somehow we say, well, that's my human body. And it's like, there's a big difference going on.
So what's the difference then? I mean, why don't these kind of standard Newtonian ideas apply? Now, again, just intuitively, there's this sense of reductionism. I don't want to be put in that box. It somehow feels kind of intuitively wrong, but I don't want to kind of do the hippie thing and be like, oh, Newtonian physics bad. So like, how are we different specifically?
Well, firstly, we're anti-gravity creatures. We must work in anti-gravity form, because if you work to a gravitational form, we're on the floor flat in a puddle. So the reason that we are expansive, the reason that I'm 5'9" or 5'9.5" or 5'10" on a good day, is that I'm pushing against gravity. And so I'm not saying there's external gravity. It's not true. But when you look at external gravity, and Isaac Newton took away friction because he couldn't calculate friction, and he took away the randomness of molecules and predicted in a straight line, i.e. forming algebra, then just those two fallacies alone of taking away friction, i.e. air friction, and the ability of the air to change itself, as well as taking away the randomness of complete, I have no idea where each molecule is at each time because I can't calculate that, so I bring it down to a simple linear format, which is basic algebra. Then you think to yourself, well, taking those two away is an issue itself with gravity. But we are anti-gravity creatures. So, for example, all of a sudden, if Newtonian principles, Newtonian laws are only built upon gravitational forces, and we're anti-gravity, not every single part of our body is anti-gravity, but majority of it is anti-gravity, then you got to say, well, if the external laws of Newtonian physics is built upon being in a gravitational field or anti-gravity, then obviously they can't be the same, because they lose some element along the way. There's a time difference, there's a frictional difference that's lost. There's no indication of electrical forces in any Newtonian principles. There's very little in fluid dynamics, and when it does, it produces what's called a rhythmical dynamical feature in Newtonian principles, which is purely based on everything being thick. So viscosity goes up. So there's this whole sort of...
The fluid one strikes me as kind of unusual, given that we're sort of mostly fluid, that viewing us like sort of pieces of wood with string attached to them, that would strike me as a massive oversight right there.
Yeah, so even just on that alone, thinking that, Newtonian principles work on the thickness of our fluid. Newtonian principles work upon that we are pushed down, everything's going against the floor, nothing's expanding. Newtonian principles work on that we are lever, which means that some joint that is artificial is fixed and doesn't move. That's what levers are. There's a fulcrum, and the fulcrum's fixed. So we suggest that the lever is the joint, or the fulcrum's a joint, so the joint don't move. There's no word on electrical forces anywhere. There's no magnetical bioelectrical fields in Newtonian principles, which we know are hugely relevant around this human body. Even takes the heart bioelectrical fields, and the gut bioelectrical fields, and the brain bioelectrical fields, and the bones piezoelectrical currents, etc., etc. Just those little principles alone suggest that actually we are nothing like the Newtonian mechanical principles that biomechanics says we are. Now, that's not an issue if you're producing artificial limbs, or you're throwing a tennis ball up and I'm calculating the distance, but I'm not a tennis ball and I'm not the same. That's why you'll never get an artificial limb replicating the limb that it lost. Yeah. Because it can only be built on mechanical principles or biomechanics or ergonomics or anything like that, which is then taken upon the Newtonian principle laws. That's why it's never going to ever replicate anything quite close to the human.
I used to work, my first ever work experience at school was working in the artificial limb department of Cambridge University's teaching hospital. So this is a little while back, but it was, top hospital around. I know things have moved on since then, but it was clear to me that even the sort of best Cambridge University medical scientists weren't producing anything nearly in the league of a working limb.
It's an impossibility because you can't replicate the human form, because the amount of movement that particular limb has it's non-repeatable. You can't repeat the same movement twice. And secondly, that the amount of configuration that particular joints, let's say, can go through all depends on the task that the information is sent to it. And we know the task is driven by far more dynamic, let's say, areas of the human form. So when there's no communication to that apart from, pressure, i.e. forces placed upon the joint, which again is another biomechanical principle or forces, then it's only going to react in whatever predetermined way that the position of the joint is being made by a man who made it. It's that sort of, I'm telling the joint how far to go and what degree to bend when it has these forces through it. I'm telling you what to do. Well, actually, that's another man-made principle, and that's another man-made artificial piece of engineering, which is, again, biomechanics is built upon.
Yeah, it is interesting to me that we've, got computers that can calculate kind of pi to millions of places or beat people at chess, but making a robot that can walk upstairs is almost impossible. People are really struggling to make robots that just do these very basic tasks from the kind of programming them point of view. And as you say, it's a lot of it seems to be around task. I see yoga teachers, for example, that have studied a lot of biomechanics and they know anatomy. But actually, in reality, if I reach for this glass that's in front of me to drink the water, that's a lot of complex movement. And I couldn't possibly all work out what muscles I'm using and kind of track that in some way. It's the task itself which dictates it. No,
precisely. And, I was in Singapore last week teaching a course, and I think the word biomechanics came up. And I always go back and just say, if you just take a very simple bone A, bone B, space in between somehow, they might want to go, like we said earlier, they might want to go more in direction of flexion extension, but there is lateral movement and rotation to it. It has to be before to get any any flexion extension out of it. And you say, well, okay, so that's 6 movements. So the 6 movements above, the 6 movements below. Let's take an average number. How many is that? Well, 36 or 360, depending on on your interpretation of calculations. But I just say to them, let's just say it's 40 for argument's sake. Okay, how many joints you got in your body? They say, well, I say, let's say 200 for argument's sake. 200 times 40. Let's say it's a big number for argument's sake. Let's say it runs into 10,000 for argument's sake, and there's more. Can you tell me exactly where those 10,000 joints are working and how they're working and what they're doing and what force and direction and positioning and what the electrical information to it is going to switch on a certain muscle, release a certain muscle, etc. Every second of your stride when you're walking from here up your stairs to your bedroom? Yeah. And the answer is, well, no, of course I don't. Well, then how can you tell me that a muscle switches off in this action? Because you don't even know whether your muscle is even engaged in this action, because no one does. And then when you do have some form of validation, you do an EMG study and you say, well, can you run? And actually there's too much noise in the machine. I can't pick up the predictable, this is a quad or this is a hamstring. So can you slow it all down, slow that movement down so I can get some pickup on the machine? Now, how is that then real? Again, it's predetermined activity. So if you can't tell me exactly what is happening at each step that you take in a 5-second simple gait cycle, then please do not tell me that the foot needs to do A, B, and C, or the knee needs to be A, B, and C, or your right arm needs to be A, B, and C. Because if it did, then every single person on the planet will be walking exactly the same way. And they don't. The reason they don't is that the task at the end, what they search to do, the problems they're trying to solve, the creativity and novelty and the goal tasking that they're producing at the end to go somewhere is always going to be different from each person.
Yeah. And on top of the fact that there's a functional task, anything like walking also has a psychological and a social task.
Yeah, precisely.
There's a psychological and a social aspect to all those movements as well, which makes them, people stand in some hell of a weird ways from a biomechanical point of view, but from a kind of psychological, social point of view,
makes perfect sense.
It starts to make more sense. Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's the thing with biomechanics is, it's purely driven by the mechanical principles of the body, but has very little relationship, or even doesn't even contemplate a relationship to the brain or the mind or another part of the body which takes in all kinds of information. That the human body itself, I'm a biomechanics by trade, but I'm the first one to say, and probably because of the book I'm the first one to say, our bodies are slaves to what we're thinking. How we live our life, how we live this artificial reality in our minds, because it's all reality, none of it's real, it's our interpretation of what's real. How we live in this is our body's representation. If I want to change the mechanical body, I stop thinking mechanically.
Yeah. So how we think makes a big difference, doesn't it? Even in terms of being aware of anatomy. I was in Amy Matthews' class the other day, and just sort of conceptualizing things differently makes a big difference. But it's like when I laugh when they say, oh, we found this Neanderthal foot bone, and therefore this is a computer graphic of how they used to walk. And I think, don't be silly. You don't know how they think.
Yeah.
You don't know how the Neanderthal society was evolved. You don't know like what they were trying to do day to day. Like you can't pretend that you know how they're going to be walking based on the fact that you found a leg bone.
Yeah.
So they could be skipping in a way that's completely unimaginable, you know?
Yeah. And that's the other thing as well. And that's a perfect setup. You know, we're living in 2018 and you've got to take a look out your window or down the high street when you go shopping and see the amount of non-mechanical, crazy, chaotic, non-postural, you know, what you classify as these are going to be in pain people moving on the street. So even if you just take this for example, and you say, you know, the Neanderthal man walked like this because their task was this, and these books were written in this age because this is the way that we perceive man then. Even if you just say, well, what Steve just said is a load of BS, just look outside your street. No, they don't even match the books that you read now.
Yeah.
Not even close to looking like the postures.
I was just in Russia, and in Russia, most of the women stand with their feet crossed on the sides of their feet. So the average Russian woman standing at a bus stop is standing, if you imagine the legs are kind of scissored across on the edge of the feet. Now, there's no way you would predict that biomechanically. That makes zero sense in terms of the structures. And, you know, the only kind of sense I could make to it physically is it's sort of, if you're wearing a short skirt, it puts your legs together so you're less cold. But even then, it's not really a good enough explanation. But, you know, what's going on with that is all sorts of psychosocial stuff. So just to look at, you wouldn't imagine in a million years someone would stand that way based on the shape of the femur. No.
But can you imagine that picture being an anatomy book now? Because it should be. If you're studying anatomy now, it should be in the book. You should be relevant to the time that you are.
Sure, that's most women standing in that cultural context on a daily basis.
So that should say, if you've got a picture of a woman in a very standing, straight postural position where traditionally it's your arms out and all this sort of stuff, that should be your picture.
Yeah, well, I've got a skeleton on the wall here. You can't see it from the camera here, but I've got a picture of an anatomical thing I keep on the wall, and it's a skeleton. And he's standing there, you know, sort of straight, equal weight on both feet, arms dangling by the side, palms in. And you know, if you actually stood that way while waiting for a hot dog in Brighton or waiting for the bus, you'd look like such a geek. People would actually point at you.
Yeah.
You would look weird.
Yeah. So even that alone, you know, if your experience of the Russian woman is standing this way, then that should be in every single picture of every single anatomy book now to represent the human form or the human female form standing.
And what about the other one in that often, you know, I used to work a lot with kids, and with kids, you see them do the most bizarre stuff with their bodies that you just think, how are you not breaking? And somehow they don't, because they haven't got this limitation that the body's supposed to move in a particular way.
Yes.
And often they're flexible and healthy on top of that, but the kids will do all sorts of bizarre stuff with their bodies.
My view is forget about biomechanics, forget about the fallacy in biomechanics, because I think we all know there's an issue between the mechanical body there's not being true and the biological body, which is still to be written, because no one knows. It's a chaotic system of complete madness in there. No one's ever going to know, because to know that, you know the human conscious, and you're never going to know that on each individual, because only you know what it's going to be about, and you probably know that at the moment where there's something else coming after. So your reality is going to change every second. So I'm never going to be able to study your reality, because it's a second later, it's a different reality, because we all are just creatures of adaptation to the environment we live in and how we perceive external reality and make it our own. But the thing with children is, and this is something which I'm a big believer in, is we as adults lose freedom of life very, very quickly. I think in 2018, we lose it even quicker than we did when I'm 43. I think we even lose it quicker than I did when I was 43. When I was a child, sorry. You know, we lose freedom. Now that freedom is a big word, but ultimately it's freedom of yourself.
Yeah.
And as soon as you lose freedom of yourself, you buy into this. How shall I say it politely? Into this,
impolite if you want.
Into somebody else's reality.
Sure. So you're being forced into a certain mold by being forced into a certain movement.
Yes. Right? So you start to then everything becomes what you think is logical. And then you take take an anatomy book, and you're learning to be a PE teacher or a yoga instructor or a biomechanist. You take a yoga book, and then you automatically believe that this is 100% true.
Yeah. So there's a process of conformity. Another example is I'm on the plane yesterday, right? So we're all sat in the same way on seats that are the same height for everyone, despite the fact that the people of massively different shapes on that plane. We're all facing the same direction and sat according to how we're supposed to be sat on a plane. The seats be designed in a certain way, with the exception of the sort of class hierarchy of the three, the bigger seats in first class, business class. And then I stand up and I just start doing some stretches. And with real simple stretches, just in the space where the toilet is, just doing a bit of side bending, because it's hard to side bend when you've got two big fat Russian blokes either side of you, and a little bit of twisting, just some simple, like, hey, I've been on this plane for 3 hours, I want to move, Yeah. And then a woman on the opposite who was waiting for the toilet started like mocking me and impersonating me. And she'd had a drink, that was her way of coping with the flight, I guess. And she started pretending to be me and sort of laughing at me. And literally all I was doing was some very simple sort of twists and side bends. And I just had this sense of like, wow, it's not only the plane that creates the structural conformity of, seats all the same, but it's also society. Like this woman's mocking me for breaking the rule that you don't do stretches on a plane, the unwritten kind of social conformity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, that's the biggest thing in anatomy or movement or whatever you want to call it this day and age is, it's me, I take it as me, and I am the person teaching you how you should move according to my values, beliefs, stories that I've told myself or been told by me throughout my life. That is now my reality, trying to force it upon your reality. And because I'm the person who's teaching you, most people then go along and say, yes, sir, no, sir, let me do what you want to do, sir.
And that's the model we have from education, right? And
that's education all the way through from whether it's a child at 4 or 5 at school to teaching practices, whether you're teaching yoga, Pilates, biomechanics, whatever you want to call it. It's my view, it's my reality of something being enforced upon your reality of something. So you start to think you learn it in your head, but you don't feel it in your heart and you don't feel it in your gut. You lose all intuition of life and you lose all compassion of the situations that you're in. And once you lose those two, you conform to everything mechanically in this story. You perform to everything that biomechanics then teaches you of how the body should be, and you never ever question it. And to me, that's the saddest thing, that no one questions anything about anything.
Yeah, and this is the process of sort of building conformity. Like in the military, you kind of, the first thing they teach you is how to stand in a certain way. Right, how to walk in a certain way, and it's not that soldiers today need to march up and down the battlefield. Obviously, that would be suicide in a modern war zone. But that it's creating a sense of conformity. Yes. That's what's going on there by being taught to stand and walk in a certain way. They actually even sit in a certain way in the military, and with children in school, we say sit up straight, sit in a certain way. But what's happening is they're not feeling how to sit. It's looking at what they're told to do and impersonating it, which is creating this kind of disconnect. Yes. And the same with most yoga classes, right? Not all yoga classes, obviously, but most of them are saying this is the perfect mountain posture. Yeah. And, you have to thrust your chest forwards and your arms back. And, it's very, very military-like. Yes. The average Iyengar Tadasana, for example. And it's a process of learning conformity rather than disconnect from your own body. It's a disembodying process.
Yeah. And who's to say, and I understand there's some, and yoga is one of those modalities where, positioning someone in a certain position, the lack of flexibility, say the lack of conformity in these traditional understanding of how the body should be, and then you have this linear action that you think you can only go. So your mental prowess and your stories that you told yourself throughout your life is, I can't get my knee in that direction because it's going to hurt, even though it hasn't hurt. You're predicting the future based on a representation of the story which you've made up, and et cetera, is that, not only are you then forced, but then you're giving it a word. And that's just, to me, that's not even funny. The down dog, it's like, I understand you have to represent it in forms, but why not just represent it in shapes? Or, give the person a big shape to then try to feel, and say, as long as you're fitting in that shape somewhere, if your knee bends, your knee bends. If your elbow bends, your elbow bends. It's not an issue. If you're not in pain and discomfort, then this is great for you. You've adopted the shape.
Yeah, the shape becomes the thing, though, isn't it? Like, yes. But why make the shape? I've never quite understood that, and there's a lot of attention, energy, and people spend thousands of hours of their life trying to make a shape. And I'm always kind of like, A, so what? Like, what do you achieve when you make that shape? But like, B, also the process of conforming to that shape has a consequence.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that might be one of the only ways to think about it if you are in a particular yoga class. And I say yoga, for example, where you're carrying out 6 poses, and each pose has to have a start and an end somewhere. So, you know, it's one thing about shape is that, you know, I'd rather someone say, you know, adopt this type of shape, but if it's a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, or it's not, adopt a non-symmetrical shape.
Yeah,
that's what I would like to see, rather than saying, well, this is a down dog and a down dog is this, and it's got to be this and it's got to be that, because that's the way that I've been taught, and that's what the picture tells me, and that's the way that I do it. I
was covering someone's yoga class the other day. I said, look, I don't really know how you guys do tree. We're going to stand on one leg. You can put your leg up a bit if that feels good. You could experiment with this way. If you want to do more like this half moon shape, if you want to challenge yourself, if that doesn't feel safe, you don't have to. You can just put one toe on the floor rather than take the leg up. And I was giving options, and I was saying, look, just explore a balance through standing on one leg and play with that and have fun with that. Yeah. And some people loved it. They were like, wow, I actually get to explore. And I think, you know, for beginners and for people who have a certain maybe more conservative mindset, it was like, well, just tell us what to do, Mark. Yeah. And I was like, nah, I don't want to, because for several reasons. One, it's not safe to tell you what to do, because I'm not possibly going to, even if I gave like there's 3 variations, you know, that's not possibly going to cover everyone. And there's an arrogance to that, to saying, you know, I know the best way for you to do this, for you to develop, you know, what are we looking at? You know, we were looking at balance, we were looking at fight-flight response, we were looking at pride and shame, you know, all this interesting stuff you can look at. Yeah. And I said, well, just explore that. Here's an area, we're going to do something sort of on one leg. And some people loved it and some people really didn't, because we're fairly conditioned, I think, to be told what to do.
Spot on. And I think people don't understand, I think people genuinely don't understand that living a conformative type of life existence with the views that you have that conforms to what the environment or the social outlet that you're in, and living by those rules when they're not actually your rules to live by, it loses your ability to be creative, to be novel, to problem solve, to plan, to goal task. The evolution of the human mind, brain, whichever you want to call it, is for us to set ourselves tasks, to us to be creative and novel, to problem solve, and to find a way to get whatever we're doing done the best way we can with our education and knowledge. That's movement as well. You set someone a task, you give them a novel challenge, you find creativity in that, you give them some tools to problem solve, and they will then go and find the end task or the end result in the way that's best for them. That's movement. That's how we learn, and that's how we live. When you conform in that way, like some from your class, please tell me, Mark, you know already that they are regressing, so to speak, in their evolution. And that alone is going to have all kinds of, and you would tell me better than anybody else, all kinds of psychological elements that they will keep battling for the rest of their life, not just in predetermined movement, which is not even close to being anything like their movement. There's no feeling in the movement. There's no intuition in the movement. And they will buy into the predetermined biomechanical understanding of the movement quicker than everybody else. But you know as well as I do, that doesn't just feed into movement, that just feeds in the whole aspect of
that's feeding into how they, you know, how they do everything, right? You know, we're conditioning a system to be a certain way. We had, actually, it's interesting, we had 2 comedians on this podcast, a couple of improvisers, one that does comedy improvisation and one that's very much into he does like this silent speed dating where you have to like in the moment connect with someone. And they were both in whether it was in dating or in comedy, they were both saying the same stuff you're saying, in terms of like actually being responsive to what's going on, and not, you know, a predetermined chat up line is always a bad chat up line. You know, and it's the best chat up line in the world can be, hi, you look nice, my name's Mark. The best kind of sales technique can be, you know, whatever's just spontaneous, not this predetermined sort of line. You know, I think we want to work it out, don't we? I also remember back like 20 years ago, I did my first kind of Iyengar style yoga class, and some of the shapes just felt wrong. I was just like, nah, this doesn't make sense. And if you look at the book, there's like a straight line that's literally with he drew with a pen. He drew with a pen on the book, you know, on pictures and photographs, and said, this is where the straight line should be, because it looks aesthetically appealing somehow to that kind of mind that's used to geometry and that sort of thing. And does this.
And that's built upon, you know, the fundamental base of school education in this country, all the way up to understanding some form of, again, biomechanics, made up science. I'm going to, maybe I'm going to get shot down for saying that, but it's a made up science.
Yeah.
It's not biology. It's not, it's not neurology. It's not something you can delve into. And even that has its fallacies, we know, and they're changing that every single second, but they're allowed to change it because it does change. Biomechanics, it's a made up subject, it's a made up science that hasn't changed in over 250 plus years.
That's quite shocking, isn't it? Like anatomy and biomechanics are really, as you say, like Grey's Anatomy or even Da Vinci pictures, it's really old. Like it doesn't seem to have evolved much.
No, and you do a timeline 250, 300 plus years old, hasn't changed. That tells you that the belief in biomechanics is we don't change, we don't evolve, we don't adapt, we don't move and develop. And that, hey, look, I'm not saying biomechanics I'm not saying biomechanics is not needed. There's certain areas where it's needed, especially in sports equipment and justifying how far a cricket ball goes or how fast the soccer ball goes and all them sort of scenarios which may be more skill based in certain elements, and that's great, but it's definitely not designed to represent the human body in any way, shape, or form. So the quicker we get away from using biomechanical language, and if people still want to use biomechanics, great, but understand that we need to use that word differently.
So how do we use it differently? So if it's not plumb lines and levers and the sort of normal way, there is literally a plumb line on this skeleton chart here, Yeah. And it's when I'm standing, I can be trying to find that magical line and end up again just rigid and kind of dorky, And it's like if we're not using this kind of concepts and it's easy to be a critic, isn't it? So what do you write about in your book? What do you replace this with?
Well, I think that the thing that we have to concern ourselves with biomechanics, and I think it's the same with any type of science, even though some other science are more biological based, is we need to understand the I and the me and the self of the person first. We need to understand that, we are adapted to movement and we should move in any direction with any intensity, force, displacement, speed, velocity, whatever mechanical principles you want to use, whenever we want to, as freely as we want to. And to be able to do that, we need to understand that the population which does that in most freest way from a free mind to a free body and does not care about the consequences at the end of their movement, whether that be, it's perfect, I did this, I lifted more weight, I looked, symmetrical, are children. So if you want to have a look at movement, we need to understand we are all children in grown-up bodies.
Yeah, the relearning to play is a big part. I had a group, I was teaching 2 days ago, something called the Queer Facilitator course in Moscow. So I had a whole bunch of kind of facilitators working with gay community in Moscow, and people are quite tight in their bodies because, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of, suffering there. And the first thing I said, we did the introduction and we're like, right, okay, let's look at learning and how you learn. And I said, right, first of all, let's get on the floor. And everyone, and they're like, what? We're used to being in chairs, formal kind of learning. And just to get people non-conforming and it gets people in kind of play mode again. Yeah. And the reason I did that is I want to kind of loosen up the mind of the group. I wanted the group to be open to a new way of learning and to loosen some of that stiffness, which had kind of, for very good reasons had come to be. Yeah. But that was the first place I had them, was just on the floor. And I'm also encouraged when I see we got the guy from Fighting Monkey coming on and some of these cool kind of movement systems that are evolving now. Like it seems like people are returning to tree climbing and kind of like kids type stuff.
It's been a kid again.
There's a class in London now, a tree climbing class in London now.
Yeah, because the thing that people don't realise, I'm a 43-year-old man. I react the same way I did when I was a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah,
I'm nothing more than a 5-year-old in an adult's body. When you push me against a corner and you make me react to a situation that spontaneous and reflexively, I will revert back to a childlike mentality, to the point where I got what I wanted as a child. So we're all just children in big person's bodies. So we still have that mentality that we want to play, but the conformity of living in this world of trying to find the materialistic things, again, the mechanical type life that we want with the fancy cars and the big houses and et cetera, and the ego that drives along with that, we go away from knowing our true self or being our true self, we was when we was a kid, to then conforming to this linear model that, like you said before, that fixes into this mechanical type mind. I always go play, I always go dance. Not predetermined dance, not dancing where you're trying to learn a new skill. Just put the radar in your bedroom to the, I'm a 43-year-old man. I don't know how you are, Mark. And
I think we're both 44-year-old British, fairly working class men as well.
1980s music, best thing in the world for me. Bananarama, Culture Club, Spandau Ballet. You're laughing, so you know the score. So I'll stick the 80s channel on, stick it on, blast it out, and only does it produce memories or stories that I'm telling myself in my mind. That's when I listen to it, because I had I'm not saying all childhoods are great, okay, and that's another story, but mine was. So I go back to the 80s when I was in my early 10, 11, 12. Find my first True Blue album from Madonna. I knew where I was when I bought it. It was what was it? HMV or something. It was one of the old stores. I remember buying Tracy Chapman and Spandau Ballet True and all them sort of. So when they come on, not only am I got this biggest smile on my face, I'm ported back to that time. I've got 2 children, I've got a wife, I've got a mortgage, I've got all that going on. I go straight back to that time, and I free my body up at that moment, as I did when I was a kid, with no predetermined of how am I looking? Is it looking good? Am I looking sexy? Yeah. Is it symmetrical? Is there am I a little bit too much weight here, or do I have my pecs look a little bit deflated today, or do I need to get a bit of bicep? Not saying that's an issue, but that's not freedom.
Yeah. We had Adam Barley on from Fire Rhythms Dance, and he was talking a lot about this. And it's funny, we need to go to a special Fire Rhythms Dance class to do it, which is great, and I encourage people to do that. But it's also like, as you say, you can just put some cheesy pop music on, and my wife just closes the curtains in the living room and just jumps around to her favorite sort of goth metal music that she grew up.
Perfect. We've got trampoline in the garden with the kids. We jump on the trampoline. Me and my little boy will wrestle for half an hour, and he will kick the FUCK out of me. But you try to tell me how I'm moving in there. You try, you get me moving like that. Without that, I'm never going to move like that. Yeah. But in that situation, my little 6-year-old is trying to beat me up. I'm all over the place.
Sure, I got it.
I get out there, my heart's pumping. I've had a good workout.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm picking my niece up. I'm rolling her around my head, and I'm using all this like core strength and crazy little muscle workout. So it's a much better strength workout. For me, if you want to go away from that biomechanical thing and use like that kinesiological type scenario where it's this movement, I love that. I don't know, freedomology. Let's call it that. To me, the more that we can be in tune with how we move without predetermining the aspects of it. I understand that there's sporting activities which require skill element. Yeah, that's different. It's still not mechanical. That's learning the skill. But for me, the quicker we go away from the biomechanical model, I say bring back a freedomology type thing, then, not only are we going to move in a way that gives us better results, we're going to love we're going to love to move. We're going to want to move, and we're going to do it in such a free way that we don't care on the outcomes. And to me, that I see it in people that move, and they go, "What was that for?" Because I just loved it. And you're like, that, "Oh man, I wish I could have that. Or I wish they could have that. I wish my clients could have that." It's funny, actually, well, first of all, I think we should say that the reason people should feed their children is so they get like an increasing level of weight training in their wrestling and strength training. And that's important. I've noticed as my niece has got bigger, it's pushed those limits. But you've really excited me here, Stephen, because it's like, first of all, I was like, why are we geek? It's kind of geeky. And I was like, I don't really get why this matters. And now I'm like into it, I'm going, okay, this is really about freedom. This is about non-limitation. And as you say, not so much like, how can I go to the gym? Because the average gym is very much in that mechanistic model, isn't it? If you do 20 crunches on a machines that didn't even exist not long ago, those resistance machines, a fairly new invention. And then I get this very predetermined outcome, the 6-pack or the bicep gets bigger or whatever. And, that for me always felt kind of sad, and it's not that I'm against weight training, even, I've done some weight training, but there was something sad about that mechanical model in a gym that actually I felt kind of I used to go to LA Fitness for about a year, which is a pretty standard gym in Brighton. And I used to be in there, the TVs were on, I'd be doing my weights, and it just somehow felt a bit soul destroying,
Yeah. And for me, I think one of the key things that I wanted to get out from the book is, again, we can talk about subjects all day long, but it's to give people back the understanding that there is no elitist in movement. There is no, I'm a biomechanist, so I know how you move. I'm a physiologist, so I know your heart works. I'm a neurologist, so I know how about your brain works. No, we know how we move once we get in tune with our feelings of how we move.
There is something that's quite a power move that, often I see, like, and as anatomy has got quite popular over the last 5-10 years in yoga and other kind of arts, and sort of knowing the name of a muscle in Latin or being able to describe these complex things. I put a little thing on the yoga movement research group. It's a good little Facebook group I'm part of the other day, and about my pelvis tilt, and just all these responses came back that were barely in English. And I'm someone who studied anatomy, and I could barely understand 50% of them. Yeah. And it seemed like a real sort of snobby world of anatomy that's developing. And you know what I mean? Unless you've done 5 years of anatomy trains and 200 dissections, and then what do you possibly know?
Yeah. And to me, how egotistical, how sad, and how frustrating it is that we have this elitist science or movement that's then telling you how to move based on a book or books, which is based on dead drawings of dead people to then be represented by mechanical principles of non-living type substances. Then you go back to them, they're teaching you how to move because they have the qualification that suggests that they know what's best for you in your movement. Forget about you, forget about how you move, forget about what you want to move. And, your life, your mind and your brain and your soul and your spirit and your social interactions and your environmental stimulus and et cetera, they're teaching you. To me, that's no different from me telling my 6-year-old son, that's wrong because daddy knows best.
Yeah. There's like as you say, but why? Like it's I found that very frustrating when I've been in a yoga class and they tell you have to put your chest out this way or stretch this way, and I'd say, okay, cool. Why is that? And then say, well, it's the lineage. It's just how we do it.
How we do it. Yeah.
And same in martial arts. This is just how we do it. And I think we're past that point in culture that doesn't really fit with kind of Western kind of since the Renaissance. Really, I mean that's medieval thinking.
Yes.
It's thinking that hasn't existed, really in everyday life since the 16th century.
Yeah. And it's another way of just putting you in a social hierarchy.
Yeah. Of saying, okay, I'm the boss because I know about this. You should sit this way. You should stand that way. Yeah. It's more about power than it is about learning anything.
Yeah. And I think, a movement revolution, if we call it that, is when people just say, I feel I should do this, so I'm going to do it.
I feel I should,
so I don't.
I do see that happening to some degree, actually.
Yes,
I'm encouraged in yoga. I'm encouraged. There's a lot of people doing the free movement stuff now, the free dance. Martial arts has got a lot more fluid and creative now. It's moved away from the kata model to something a bit more real, a bit more reality-based, MMA, that kind of stuff. It seems like there is a definite movement afoot. It's almost like embodiment is catching up with the Renaissance,
Yes.
It's like we're a few hundred years behind in terms of like actually asking why and prove it and what actually, and then there's the subjective, like what actually feels good, as you say. I've taught yoga classes where I've said, just lie on your back and, whatever feels good, you can do that for a few minutes before we start the class. Yeah. And I remember one guy particularly who'd only ever done hot yoga, which is one sequence, only ever done one sequence. He was a teacher in it and he literally didn't know what to do. Yeah. I felt really sorry for him, I was like, wow, I just said lie on your back, move a bit, but all the hot yoga sequence is done standing that he knows. So he didn't know anything to do. Yeah. And he was looking around for ideas, Yeah. And I thought, man, just feel,
And all of us in the movement world, whether it's a biomechanist or yoga instructor or Pilates or Feldenkrais class or biologist or whatever you want to call it in the movement world, hopefully we all got into it because we want to help people live a better life through motion.
Yeah.
A nutritionist gets into it because they want to help a better life for a client through nutrition.
There's positive intent in there, isn't there? Like
that's what we get into it for.
Yeah.
So if my only real life value in what I do is to give people back the opportunity to be themselves through movement, then surely I should be the one that says, I will give you the movement back to you without me telling you how to move. Yeah. As long as you're listening to me how to move, it's not your movement. It's my reality.
Is there a risk someone could get lost in that though, or just kind of keep doing? I'm playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Like a beginner that goes, well, I just don't have any idea what to do. Just give me a couple of basic yoga shapes, or someone that's just going to continue to do unhealthy habitual movements because the body does lie. It's like an Alexander technique. You kind of it can feel good to do what's just familiar, even if it's really unhealthy.
Yeah, but isn't that the difference between being a teacher or being a coach or just being a mentor, or just being a friend. You know, I'm not advocating that we just say, well, go and play and off you go, and I don't want to see you again.
There's some facilitation, there's some coaching, there's some mentoring there. Yeah.
But it's whether I'm teaching you, which is a more traditional, I've learned it this way, that's the way you're going to learn it. To me, facilitating some form of coaching where we set tasks and make it novel and creative, and you find and you solve a problem along the way, and we just guide you. And I think that's the key. Yeah,
we really struggle with this. I've just come back from Russia teaching, and really struggle with it there with anyone who grew up in the communist times, particularly because it's not separate from politics and, you know, authoritarian cultures. That the older people there often, I was saying to them, stop teaching people, which, you know, is teaching itself, so kind of ironic. But I was saying to them, look, set up experiments and get people to try things and ask people questions, you know, and see if that's more effective than what you're doing now. And which is more like coaching. And you know, that was a big mindset shift, particularly for a lot of the older people there that were just used to the sort of power of, well, I know best, so I'm going to tell you what to do. And it could be well intended, but I think we can do better than that today. You know,
of course, and you know, and I always say, you know, you always see people move, and you know, the first thing you say to them, "Why aren't you smiling?" You know, you're here. You're being told what to do, or, you know, teachers teaching, you're told what to do, and you haven't smiled once. Why are you here? Please go and find a place where you do smile.
If pleasure's missing, that's a real issue.
If pleasure's missing, there's an issue. You force yourself to do a movement because you think it's good, but you hate every single second. Even if you do put this artificial smile on your face, you are dreading every single second there. Then that ain't doing you no good whatsoever.
Where's the love, baby? Where's the love?
You know, so, and I see that. I see when we are enforcing this linear type mentality upon our school children, our academics of biomechanics, how, you know, just our social well-being, and how we are formed and dognated into this, you are this, and this is what you have to do. And if you go against the grain, there's something wrong. There is no love. There's no passion, there's no excitement, there's no pleasure when that person is carrying that out whatsoever. And to me, forget about movement, forget about everything like that, because movement is just a byproduct of you being happy and you being wanting to move. If you don't want to live your life the way that you're living it, because there's issues regarding how you're pigeoned and put into this box, and deep down in your mind, when you have that 5 minutes of silence, you are dreaming of being somebody else, then not only is that going to impact your psychological life and your mental health, but your movement. You know, your traditional anatomy is going to change in a millisecond.
To
me, if you want to look at anatomy and you want to understand how the anatomical body is, even though we just said for this last hour how there's so many fallacies, if you do want to understand how that person moves, you need to understand how they move when life is absolutely shit, and when life is the best they've ever had.
Because that's an entirely different movement, and it's like this thing on my wall again. You know, is the skeleton happy or sad? It makes a real big difference. You know what I mean? Like, how stressed is he? Is he miserable, or is he just overjoyed because, you know, he just asked someone to marry them and they said yes? You know, like, that's a real different skeleton. And so people listening to this, you know, we like to make it experiential sometimes here on the show, like. You know, I guess I'm hearing an invitation from you for people listening to this to be like, okay, is there more pleasure? Where can I find more freedom here? Like, what invitation would you have for someone who's listening to this experientially? You know, they're on the subway in New York, or they're walking through London, or, you know, our listeners are all over the world. So they could be doing anything. So what's your invitation for them?
My invitation for you guys is to break norm.
Break a norm.
Break a norm. Be in whatever environment you are. Look around you and see everybody around you doing exactly the same thing, moving the exactly same way, with the same posture, with the same breath, with the same style and shape. And you can then predict the same thoughts they're having. If you find yourself in that situation, which we all do every single second, do something the complete opposite in that moment, that they will look upon you as being crazy, but actually you're the sane one for doing it.
And no one can arrest you for what you do with your own body. Unless it's a Nazi salute in Germany. But with that one exception, it's your body. Like, you know, it could be going up the stairs 2 at a time instead of 1. It could be standing the other way around.
Anything that's different from what everyone else is doing. You know,
culture is dangerous.
Yes, I do it in the airports. You probably do it. Everyone takes the escalators going up. Everyone takes the escalator going forward. I'm the one walking. I did it when I came back from Singapore. I walked backwards.
Oh, in Singapore, they must have loved that.
It's like, but I knew that moment that actually I was breaking all kinds of social norms within myself.
Yeah.
And that was massively important to me at that moment, because but this is, I'm talking about moments where people just find themselves in daily, every single day, day in, day out, day in, day out,
Yep.
day in, day out, day in, day out. And they understand why, they don't want to be there. They don't want to be doing it. Their life is not as good as they want to be. And the movement's not as good. Do something the complete opposite when you find yourself in that situation. Shout, jump up and down, do a silly dance. I don't care what it is. Do something that's completely different, that takes you out of the situation you're in, provides creativity, norm, and it gives you something psychologically and physically different. It changes your state in the association where everyone else's state is in negative. You're changing your state into positive. If you want to speak about mindfulness, mindfulness is just you exposing yourself completely different when everyone else is exposing themselves in different. So if everyone's doing something A, you do something B.
Nice. So I think I'm going to call this podcast something like the biomechanics of non-conformity.
That's perfect.
And I like your rebellious streak here. I'm loving that. You've excited me about your work. So where can people find out more about your stuff before we sign off, Stephen?
Yep. So big thing, Facebook, Stephen Braybrook. You see me with a skeleton. I have a company called Brain Move, which I teach overseas in the UK. Just been in New York and Singapore this last couple of weeks, in London this week. So you can Google me, Stephen Braybrook. You can Google Brain Move or The Movement Man, and you will find all kinds.
Movementman.com, isn't there?
That's movementman.com. Yep, that's a new website up. You can Google me or just Stephen Braybrook or Stephen Braybrook Brain Move, or just find me on Facebook, Stephen Braybrook. I'm standing.
And how do they find the book on Amazon as well?
If you just type in Amazon and just type in The Evolution of Biomechanics, it will come up.
I will put a link. So for those people who are listening on like iTunes or whatever, make sure you go to the embodiedfacilitator.com website where the actual podcasts are there. And then there's direct links to all this stuff. So, I'll make sure the links are on there. You can't really add them as clickable links as on the kind of iTunes or whatever. So I'll make sure they're on our main website. Stephen, this has been loads of fun. I need to get off the line. I'm interviewing someone else in about 15 minutes.
Brilliant. Take
a quick movement break from the tyranny of sitting down. So this has been loads of fun. I really enjoyed your passion, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Thanks so much.
Cheers. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to get more. If you'd like to help us build the Embodied Tribe, leave a review on iTunes or share this on your social media. If you're interested in training globally, sign up to receive the newsletter at embodiedfacilitator.com. Until next time, welcome home to the body.